You're listening to Seminary Dropout, Episode 9. And you are listening to Episode 9 of Seminary Dropout, where we're somewhere in between seminary class and youth group trust falls. Welcome. I'm always glad that you're here. Diving right into the show, last week I posted a blog post that was an open letter to the Proverbs 31 woman. It got a lot of attention, so I think it really means that it seems to be resonating with some people, and especially women who maybe have been told by the church what their calling is instead of the other way around. So let's talk about the interview today. Sometimes Seminary Dropout is there so that you can hear from your favorite authors and thinkers, your Tony Campolos, your Shane Claibornes, but other times it serves as more of a recommendation show, giving you people that you may not have heard of, but you should have, like your Caitlin Beatty's or your J.R. Woodward's, for instance. Well, today's guest is from that latter category. His name is Sam Myrick. He's the pastor of Mosaic Austin in Austin, Texas. Yeah, that happens to be where I go to church, which makes him my pastor. I always try to make my interviews like a conversation between two friends, but that feeling was especially authentic in this interview. And today I have with me Sam Myrick, pastor of Mosaic Austin. Sam, thanks for being with me.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Shane. Good to see you.
You're obviously my pastor, so I have a bias here. We know each other. It's a little bit different than the other interviews that I've had thus far. So one of the first thing that I want to talk about today is that you recently talked a lot about this idea of Sabbath.
Oh, yeah.
And I want to know what brought that on in your life that made you kind of investigate that or think about, preaching on that and things like that.
Yeah, that's good. Good question. I didn't grow up in the church the first 10 or 11 years of life. And then I was a part of a great church, a good first church experience for me. From the age of 12 to like 18, and when I went to college at a Southern Baptist church. They did a lot of things well, and but it was a big church, and there were several people on staff. And I've just gotten the feeling over the years of being a part of or seeing big churches that it's a little easier for it to happen there, for pastors to take care of themselves or be taken care of. I don't know that I noticed that early on, but I started to notice it through college and then definitely seminary. And in fact, I was most attracted to those types of settings because it was A, what I knew the best, or I knew the most about, and B, because selfishly it seemed like that's where the pastors were paid well there, and there were benefits,
right.
And they got rest, and I was part of a Presbyterian church in Denver during seminary, and it wasn't a mainline Presbyterian denomination, but it had kind of sprung out of that, and so they were still taking sabbatical.
Yeah.
I had never seen that before,
which is like unheard of.
Yeah, and I started to see that in college, professors and seminary professors doing it. But I didn't know churches did that.
Right.
Until there. And so that's when I first started to hear, and then some seminary classes, thankfully. My undergrad degree was a lot more focused on biblical studies and theology, and it wasn't a lot of pastoral ministry classes. I didn't really do a lot of that till seminary. And so that was when I started to actually be kind of taught about the importance of rest and boundaries and pastors taking care of themselves. I think it was all theoretical, though, until I got to Mosaic, which is my first full-time pastorate. And It's the opposite of what I was used to. Mosaic had 40 people or so when we showed up 8 years ago, and not much money then, kind of like now, but one thing that somehow it did well, even though there weren't a lot of resources, is it was kind of inherent in its DNA that we need to take care of ourselves. I feel like Don did an okay job of that, and I was encouraged to do that as well. And so we tried to look out for each other with hours, and if we had a big Holy Week, or had done an alt worship experience or something that took a lot out of us, then we took time off. And so it kind of started out for me like actually having to think about it more and do it more here in the last few years. And then kind of by way of wrapping up or leading to where I am now, I think I really started to understand some of the theological underpinnings or like need for Sabbath in the life of everyone, but maybe specifically or a different looking Sabbath experience that was needed for pastors when I started reading Eugene Peterson's pastoral works years ago. So,
what are some of his stuff?
Yeah, the first I get most people know him now. All I knew him as for years is the guy who wrote the Bible.
Yeah.
And as a biblical studies major in college, I wasn't crazy about that idea.
Right.
Who does this guy think he is? Where's his team of Greek and Hebrew scholars who were translating with him? And so I was kind of pushed back against the message and what I thought of Eugene Peterson all the way until maybe the last 5 years or so, because I didn't really know anything about him, and that he was a pastor for 30-something years, all at the same church. And he made a decision right out of seminary and planting a church, a Presbyterian church, somewhere around Baltimore, I think the suburb of Baltimore. In the 60s, he made this decision that pastors, already he was starting to see that pastors move around way too much. They use one church as a stepping stone to the next church. And he made this, who knows what led him to make this commitment as such a young man. He decided he always wanted to be a pastor of that church. And so I think he probably figured out pretty early on that he needed to take care of himself to avoid burnout, or needing to move on to something else. And the other great thing he said, doesn't relate to Sabbath, but in the beginning, the other great thing he said was that he never wanted to pastor a church that got too big for him to not know most people's names. And so even as successful as that church was, and as great a ministry as he had there, I think it still only had a couple hundred people. Intentionally.
Which is so counterintuitive to what we see now.
Yeah, I don't know. I should research. As much as I like him, I haven't thought to look and find out how they did that for 30 years. Someone who's a well-known author and all, how they kept it. If they were, I assume they were planting churches out of it.
One would assume they would have to plant,
But anyway, he wrote a lot. It comes up in a few of his books. I guess as he was pastoring, he started writing halfway through or near the end of his pastoring life. And then he moved into full-time writing in academia. And so he wrote at least 4 or 5 books specifically about pastoral ministry that I'm aware of. And the first one that I read was called The Contemplative Pastor. And that was one where he talked a lot about rest and Sabbath, and what that looked like in his ministry, and some of the theology of it, or what informed his beliefs about that. Another really great one was called Under the Unpredictable Plant.
I actually read that one.
Okay, yeah.
Was it an unpredictable plant or tree?
Maybe in tree.
I don't know. Anyways.
Something was unpredictable.
Yeah.
It was one of the things he does really great, which makes him kind of like the message more now, later in life. The way he interprets scripture, or how he can relate I mean, that entire book, and I think it's subtitled something like Vocational Holiness, pastoring. The entire book's based off of Jonah. And, there's a couple of chapters in this, from this prophetic work that we don't spend a lot of time with, or don't really understand, or you just focus on Jonah and the fish or whatever. But he writes an entire book, kind of pulling apart the Jonah story and and Jonah as a pastor, and what the potential pitfalls are that he falls into.
Being called to Nineveh as his.
Yeah, and gosh, I can't. It's been at least 2 years since I read that, but I don't remember how in depth he goes with the story. But that's kind of its framework. And he does a similar thing with a book that's not necessarily about pastoring, but called something about running with the horses. I think that was kind of the same thing with David's life, a lot of David's life. And then there's another one called 5 Smooth Stones for Pastoral Leadership that I've read. It's good. But anyone who hasn't read any Peterson, now that it's been out for over a year, I probably would recommend that people just read his memoir.
Oh yeah.
His most
What's that one called?
It's just called The Pastor. Because he doesn't end up fully absorbing all of those different books into this memoir, but he tells a lot of the same stories. And I found myself being like, oh, I remember this story from the contemplative pastor or whatever. But when it's looking over his entire life, and even there's just great stuff in there. He's just such a great storyteller. So he talks about being a kid and his mother being in ministry, and how he feels like some of that was alive in him early on. But also how his dad was a butcher, and how his dad being the friendly neighborhood butcher played into teaching him about pastoring. So it's really great, but he talks a lot about Sabbath in there, and tells a few stories that I've not heard. And so all of that for me has been an experience that I've learned or begun to walk through at Mosaic. And I think it really the stakes got a lot higher last year when there was staff transition stuff and things in play that made it to where there was less staff and more responsibilities for me.
And so for those who don't know, which would be most people listening to this, we went.
Yeah, I just took us to a weird place. You didn't have to ask that question. I just brought it up.
No, it was perfect. So Mosaic went from 3.5 on staff?
Yeah, 3 full-time pastors and a part-time music pastor.
Okay, to 1.5, right?
Yeah.
You being the one.
It always feels weird to call somebody half
a person.
I don't know how.
He's working half of the time.
No, I do
on paper.
I do it too, but you feel like a little jerk.
There are no little people.
Yeah, so that we're coming up on a year now. Last fall, that the founding pastor of Mosaic transitioned out here, and then another one of the associate pastors had transitioned out of here within a month or so of each other. And thankfully, there was no controversy, no awkwardness about any of it.
And from someone, I obviously am involved in Mosaic, but I'm not on staff or anything like that. And so someone from being kind of on the inside, but not on the staff on the inside, it was extremely smooth. And I have grown up in church, so I've seen bad transitions and controversial ones, stuff like that. For so much change to happen in such a short period of time, it was extremely peaceful and done really well.
Yeah, I think so. I think that I think a lot of us thought if any church could do this well, I hope it's Mosaic, and that overwhelmingly so has felt. It's felt like that's the way it's played out this year. Not perfectly, because we are still a church made up of broken people, and I'm a broken person. The leadership team is broken people. So I think it's been I think it could have been so much worse if there had been, controversy or anyone had to leave in disgrace. Or it was two people who just felt like he was to kind of run for the course for them at Mosaic and in ministry in this context. And all of that to say, I'm a full-time pastor now in Mosaic, and then we've got a part-time music pastor, Richard. And so one of the things that was great about that transition was that we had an ad hoc team of people, a transition team that had a couple of leadership team people and then a couple of folks from Mosaic who wanted to take part. And they took the 3.5 job description and whittled them down and figured out, well, what was Sam doing that he doesn't have to do anymore? What was someone else doing that Sam will need to pick up? And what needs to get totally dropped or picked up by the community? And so I felt a ton of support from them from the get-go. I had a lot of support from my pastoral care team, which is a really interesting thing we do here at Mosaic. And they've been supportive all year in caring for me personally and asking good questions and supporting and loving me well. But all that to say, I think it also was maybe a bit of providence that I had been learning about and studying and thinking about Sabbath so much and boundaries and rest the last couple of years because I had to put my money where my mouth was this year.
Right. So what does that look like for you on a weekly basis?
Yeah, there are weeks that, and it's hard to get away from this in ministry. I don't know that it's possible. There's some weeks where things are out of control and that people have needs or there are tragedies or meetings that just have to happen. And so there's some weeks that are fuller than others, but as a general rule, I try really hard to plan a week out the week before, the beginning of a week, to only work 40 to 45 hours. And if there's a week where it just has to be over that, the other great thing that happened this last year and a half is we created a personnel team who keeps track of hours and has created a personnel manual that takes care of us. And so if we have, if Richard or I work over our set hours on any week, we're encouraged to work a little less if possible the next week, in 2 weeks. And so that's helpful from an hours kind of standpoint. And I try really hard to limit my time away at the nights as well. That's a little trickier. But I've tried this year, I guess I've actually tried the last 2 years, to only be gone from home for a meeting or a Mosaic event 1 or 2 nights a week, 2 nights tops. And when those nights get taken up, when I've got to meet someone for a dinner because they couldn't meet during the day, or there's a team meeting or whatever, I'm going to a show to support someone from Mosaic who's playing music or has art opening. When those get filled up, I tell people no, whatever's going on, we do it the next week or 2 weeks from now. I've got a night free, and I try really hard to always remember to explain to people why, not just say I'm booked up that week, because I wouldn't want anyone to think I have something every night that week.
Sure. If you say I'm booked up, that means your calendar's full. Some people.
Yeah, most people. I think, especially younger people, or if they say if someone says I don't have any availability that week, you go to thinking your night's full. I'm trying really hard, and this can sound prideful, so I hope you and whatever listeners you have would understand the spirit I say it. I think a pastor is supposed to model, some types of life for a community, and so this is something I'm trying to model for our culture and tell people that we don't rest enough and we go too hard, and so I normally try to tell people I'm home with my family all but 1 or 2 nights a week, and those 2 nights for next week are taken up. So that's something. that's kind of a rule of mine. And then actually taking a Sabbath day. It wouldn't make a lot of sense to talk about the need for Sabbath or talk about these kind of general principles if that weren't happening as well. And Peterson has taught me a lot about that in his books, because I think that my first several years at Mosaic, we all had something we called a Sabbath, but a lot more often we called it a day off.
Right.
So you tell somebody on a Sunday night, like, no, I can't do that tomorrow, it's my day off.
Yeah.
And so that's something else I've tried really to model the last year or two, is actually using the word Sabbath, which isn't that relevant a word for people that are interested in that kind of thing.
Right.
It carries a ton of religious baggage with it, and law and all this kind of stuff. But it's a word I think we need to redeem and take back. And so there's a difference in a day off and a Sabbath.
And that's something I've heard you say a lot, and I kind of had a concept of that, but I wasn't really solidified until you had talked about that, the difference between a day off, which is important also, but the day off and Sabbath and how that's different. So,
yeah, I have, I work those 40 or 45 hours a week. Normally, a normal week they take place Tuesday to Friday, and then Sunday. Sunday is a work day for pastors. And so Monday is my Sabbath, and Saturday is my day off. So I have one of each. So most people are used to having a weekend and having 2 days off.
right.
I don't, and I don't want 2 days off. I want one day off and a Sabbath. So on Saturday, my wife is a massage therapist. She works a lot on Saturdays. That's really her biggest day. I have clients who can't get in for that kind of thing during the week when they're working. So I'm with my kids almost every Saturday, taking care of them, running errands, cleaning the house, mowing the yard, whatever, things that need to get done in home life or personal errands. Get my hair cut, whatever's whatever's got to happen on Saturday, along with fun stuff too, watching a game with friends, going out to dinner if we can find a babysitter, and all this kind of stuff. And Monday looks really different. I don't, even if I need to do some of those types of things, if I didn't get them all done on Saturday, I figure out sometime during the week to do them. Well, when I get home on Wednesday night, I'll mow the yard, or I'm not going to do that on Monday. Monday is ideally, I'm not perfect with this, Monday is a day where I rest well, and I read scripture and books that feed me, that recharge me. I try to spend time outside a lot in parks or on walks in nature and prayer. It's intentional time with Kim. Our daughter is in kindergarten now, so we drop her off at 7:30 in the morning, and then we try really hard that we still have our son that we're with during the day, but we kind of take turns with him, because ideally Monday would be a Sabbath for Kim too. I think a pastor and a pastor's family work really hard on a Sunday to create that Sabbath space for others, for the community. We've worked to put together the prayers and the music and the silences and talking with people and catching up with people, and so I do a lot of that inherent in my job, but it costs my family as well because I'm not around on Sunday, and Kim's handling both kids, and I'm going from this meeting to that, and I've got to go pick up these print offs from Office Depot, and whatever's going on. And so it's not really a rest day for her. She works on Saturdays, and then on Sundays I'm working, and so we try really hard to make Monday our Sabbath together. And so we talk about what's going on in marriage and our lives. And yeah, so hopefully that kind of makes sense, the difference in that and Saturday.
Yeah.
One thing that's harder for me that I ideally would do with a Monday is I try really hard not to be online on a Monday. And that goes for phone and computer. I'm not perfect with that, but most weeks you won't find me. You won't see anything I've done on Facebook or Twitter that day, or and I try not to watch TV or movies or anything that day because I've got 6 other days for that.
Right.
That I really love those things, and I'm involved in culture in that way, and being entertained in those ways on the other days. But Monday is a day to slow down and recharge.
Yeah.
I feel like I was kind of all over the place there.
No, that's exactly what I wanted to know, what I wanted to talk about. So let's transition a little bit. You recently, at the building in which Mosaic meets in, recently had a conference with several different speakers, and you were one of them.
Oh, yeah.
And for your subject, you chose to talk about David Bazan's release of the album Control, which has just reached its 10-year anniversary. Is that right?
Yeah, earlier this year was the 10th anniversary of that.
Okay, yeah. And he's doing shows now, right?
Yeah, it started last week. I think it started last week. He's going on tour with his current band, or the David Bazan band. Is going to play shows all over the country, a tour for the 10th anniversary of Control. So they're doing this thing that that started to be pretty popular the last few years of folks touring and playing their entire album.
Yeah.
Or one of their best known albums from front to end. And I assume along with other, that's only part of the night. That'll only be a 40-minute show or something.
Right.
That's all you did. So I think there's other stuff too, but that's kind of the.
He usually takes
of the night.
questions from the audience in between songs.
I haven't seen him in a couple of years. I'm pretty sure he still does that.
One would assume.
It seems inherent to him.
I saw him a few times, like I guess in the mid 2000s, and that was that was a staple of his shows. So. Was Control technically David Bazan, or was it Pedro the Lion?
No, it's Pedro the Lion.
Okay.
I think that was the next to last Pedro the Lion album. He did Achilles Heel like 2 years after Control, and I think that was the last term. Yeah, I think everything since Achilles Heel has been stuff he's done with a side project called Headphones, or just David Bazan like solo stuff.
Yeah,
and that's all really great too. It's got a different feel.
Right.
So I talked about that, and it was kind of interesting how I decided to do that. It's really interesting for the purposes of this podcast, or maybe I think it's interesting, and we're just going to bore anyone who listens to this later. But
you'll listen and you'll like it.
I had planned for when I'd asked to speak at that conference, I had planned for like a month and a half or 2 months to talk about Sabbath, and the need for the church to model Sabbath and how the world needs to see that, and just because there's a lot of what I've been most passionate about and thinking about, but it just felt like, and maybe I'll do that one day, or write on some of that kind of stuff one day, my experiences with it, but it just felt really clinical. I couldn't get excited about it. Clinical is probably not the best word, but I claimed that as my topic, and then I did a little bit of research and jotted a little of my thoughts, the kind of stuff I just shared with you. But I just could never get very excited about it, and all the time, like over and over again, somehow this year, I've gotten to talk to people about Control, or I'm always discovering new people who were impacted by Pedro the Lion. Especially in Mosaic and in Austin, and I just kept having these conversations with people about Control. And I guess something that came up in a few of those conversations was tons of people love that album. They really like it musically, or they can pick out a few of the themes. But just because I'm like super analytical or something, I had, from like 8 or 9 or 10 years ago when it came out, I just had pulled it apart. And and saw a lot of depth to it that I guess it became clear this last year talking about it once he announced this tour and people were getting fired up about that album again. I had a few conversations with people where it became clear that I was a real nerd about it.
Yeah.
And people would say like, "Oh, I never realized that," or "I didn't think that was connected."
They didn't quite exegete it to the level that you had.
And so, yeah, enough people said something like that it just hit me one day like, I can't get really excited about this other topic. But I get really excited talking about what his music, how it's impacted me, and that album specifically, how great it was, and when it came along in my life. And so yeah, I wrote the guy, the organizer, and said, hey, I know this is kind of a jerk move for me to write the organizer. I think it was like a week and a half out at that point in the conference. They had done website stuff and promoted it with this other topic. I said, I can't get excited about this other thing. I'll do it if you need me to, but I get really excited about this. And it helped, I think, that he was a big fan too, and said, "Oh, I'd love to hear that." So yes, I will approve your change.
I will allow it.
Yeah, so that was a great conference here, the first one that had met in the South, in the Mid-South, part of the Ecclesia Network, and this kind of brand new organization called Missio Alliance.
Yeah.
And I know you've talked to some other people from those groups before already, but that was a great conference, and I was thrilled to be able to be a part of it. And I got seemed to get a lot of great reception with what I talked about, and it ended up being placed in a section of the day where there was a lot of discussion about Christians and the arts, or the church and art, and how we interact with art and even make art.
Yeah, it was good. I think, can they find that online?
They
were recording it, I know.
Yeah, it was recorded. The conference, most parts of it. I don't think the breakout sessions were, but people's talks were.
Right.
And I haven't thought to check to see if that. They said that it would be up, but I don't know that it is yet.
Okay, maybe I'll put that in the show notes when we publish this.
Yeah, and you should look that up, and if there was interest, I know there's a recording. Someone had made a recording of my talk, even if all the other ones don't get posted or whatever. That you could tag this.
Okay, yeah, sure. Yeah, I'll definitely do that.
Yeah, so I was thrilled to be able to talk about that album and kind of explain some of my feelings towards it.
Yeah. So I got turned on. Like, I always knew about Pedro the Lion, but I didn't really start listening to him until like Achilles Heel and Winners Never Quit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It was an earlier.
It was, but I didn't get it till later.
Uh-huh.
But so for anyone that doesn't know, especially if you are around mine or Sam's age, which I just turned 30, you're well into your 30s.
33.
Yeah.
And then coming up on, is that kind of the mid-30s? Let's say early 30s.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine, give or take. So, but Pedro, so explain like what Pedro the Lion meant to people like us.
Yeah. It's interesting because I didn't know anything about him at all either until the year Control came out. Had not even heard of him, which is weird now because people that I knew well were loving him before then, and I had not picked up on it. So I've always loved music. I've always haven't played music, but I've always liked to sing and study music. So when I became a Christian, that was kind of tough for me. So this was like early 90s, because I was a part of a church, and the youth group that I was a part of stuff. Everyone pushed really hard, like, "Oh, you got to listen to Christian music,
right?
Stop listening to secular music." And I mean, you think about the things that you're like leaving behind at that point if you make that decision. So in 92, 93, you've got Nirvana and Pearl Jam and the beginning of grunge stuff that I was just beginning to learn about and getting. There was great stuff going on with hip hop and rap in the early '90s, really socially conscious stuff, and even interesting, I guess, like country stuff. I feel like that was the last of the good modern country, as far as I'm concerned, with like George Strait and Garth Brooks and stuff, which is the kind of thing I was listening to in Louisiana. So I listened to all of that, and then I was told, well, now you will listen to Al Denson. Al Denson and Carmen. Oh, you like rap? Listen to this guy Carmen. He's like a 50-year-old white guy, Italian. I don't know what ethnicity stuff's going, but he's gonna be a rapper now. And so the DC Talk came pretty quickly behind that.
Right.
But the first couple of years were tough for me, but I went along with it, and then it got a little better in the mid '90s. So like when I'm entering into high school, when I discovered like Tooth and Nail records and some of the like indie Christian kind of stuff. And so I followed a lot of basically from like 15 or 16 on into college. All I listened to was all the shows I went to were that type of thing. And I guess Pedro the Lion was already present at that point. It was kind of functioning, moving in some of those same circles. I just missed out on it somehow.
Right.
And then went to college, and in college I kind of, for the first time, really took a step back from Christian music and was kind of tired of where it was heading, and really latched on. I got back to secular music. I put the antenna back on my car and started listening to the radio again, and I caught up on everything that happened in the '90s that I missed out on, like gangster rap and the rest of the grunge movement and indie rock movement and stuff. So, and I did that the rest of college and in the seminary, and I was trying to figure out. I think I didn't realize it was all subconscious, but I was really missing music that moved me, not just musically, but was asking good questions, and I was a part of churches that was doing praise and worship music or church music that I liked, and I was mainly because they were returning to hymns and recasting hymns and stuff like that, and so I cared a lot about the theological depth of lyrics, and I didn't want to just have my hands in the air singing the same thing over and over. And kind of in the midst of all that, about halfway through seminary, I became friends with this girl who's a seminary student along with me, and she introduced me. She was a big Pedro the Lion fan, and I think initially because she was cute, and I was, as you often do, would like to be more maybe than just friends. I was interested in whatever she was interested in. I wanted to find out, and so
we've all been there.
That obviously didn't. Maybe it's not obvious to you, but obvious to anyone that knows me that it didn't go anywhere, because that's the way all relationships were for me until my lovely wife had mercy and fell in love with me. Now we're getting to a weird spot where my wife's not going to like on this podcast.
No, I like where this is going. Continue.
You can cut stuff out, right? No, I'll leave more of that out. But this girl was a big fan, and she said something like, she knew me well enough to say, you haven't heard Pedro the Lion? You've got to listen. Here's this CD, take it. And she gave me Control and Winners Never Quit. And she said, you're gonna love this. Like I know what kind of music you like. You're gonna love the music of this, but I think you're gonna like it lyrically too. And she said something about how he cusses a lot too. So he doesn't do it more than he has to, but he has well-placed curse words, and I feel like that's how you do it. Like that's what you do with cursing.
You cuss really nicely.
Yeah. And so you should check this out. And I just, I loved it. I right away did love the music and the way he was struggling with his faith and doubt, and still choosing to believe and choosing to press on, but asking these tough questions, and even like bringing in tough narratives. Winners Never Quit was a concept album. Was the first kind of concept album that he did, And and then he didn't really mean to write another concept album with Control, but he just started writing songs and figured out what they could kind of go together. And both of those both of those albums culminate with murder, like with people, with spouses being violently murdered, and what the build up is to that point, and then what happens afterward. And I hadn't heard. I didn't know yet about Johnny Cash either, or the really interesting things he had done throughout his life at that point. And it's kind of similar, the coming from a place of faith, but still feeling like there was something good that could be shared about the world, or maybe even the darkness of the world, but that could make you want the light, written in these murder ballads and tough stories. And then she and I went to a show because he was coming through Denver just a month behind that or so. So it was my first time to see him live, and that was a blast. And I'd never seen anybody stop the concert to field questions. And I remember some kid, it was obvious that he was like a senior in a youth group from around there who liked the music just well enough, but was struggling with some of the themes and stuff. He's like, who asked him, well, so do you consider yourself a Christian still or not? And he just kind of shook his head, he gets that question every night.
He gets a question every night.
And someone else said, what do you think about the Holy Spirit? I'll never forget, that was one of the questions. That's all he said, what do you think about the Holy Spirit? And he just kind of scratches his balding head and says, I don't know. What does anybody think about the Holy Spirit? Next, he just points. So I like him a lot. And that was the beginning of his kind of journey away from the faith in the early and mid 2000s, and I think he would consider himself now an agnostic. And I've read interviews with him and seen interviews where he said that, but I still think that the church has a lot to learn from him, even now as he wanders and maybe wanders away, because in him we have someone who can still speak the language, or knows what the church is doing well and what it's not, and still kind of loves the church in some ways, or loves the people of the church, but not how they present God. And so that was a lot of the kind of stuff I talked about. You said exegeted. I kind of exegeted that album from beginning to end in my talk, but also talked about that the church needs that type of art too. And that I am convinced that at this point in my life, that even things that don't appear redemptive, and they're too harsh or they're too dark, or we try to protect ourselves or our kids from them, but there is lessons to be learned there, because it's dark and because it points to realities in our broken world, and hopefully makes us long for goodness and long for God, because we're kind of depressed about what we just heard. So that's not for everybody, I guess, and there are some people that would rather just praise and worship, and there are people who want their stuff, who want their music or their art to be really bright and happy, and God is so great.
Positive music.
Yeah, and that's the way all of the Psalms, or most of the Psalms, end. Is with that stuff. And a lot of stories in Scripture, they end with redemption and wholeness. But the stories of brokenness are there too. And there's got to be
the valley of the shadow of death is also there.
And so we're throwing away a lot of the Psalms, the church, the early church's prayer book. If you're going to say that we can't tell God, I don't understand what's going on here, or I'm not sure I still believe in you, or why in the heck did that just happen? And, or where are you in this? Are you still on my side? And am I still on your side? All of those questions are present in Scripture, and you get the feeling that God can handle them. That He's not, that He's okay with those parts of our journey. So
and that when we don't ask those questions or admit those things, it doesn't mean that they're not there. Like there's just like the honesty that God wants, and that's exactly like the first time I really absorbed Pedro the Lion's music. It was like, wow, this is so honest. And I did, like, I was totally the guy in, you know, the youth group that got the chart that said, you know, oh, you like Smashing Pumpkins, well, listen to the Newsboys, you know. Like, and it always like filtered down. Like there was always like for every like 3 secular bands that didn't sound anything alike, there was one Christian band that they sounded like somehow.
Yeah, well, we had a long ways to go. We didn't have as deep a bench yet.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, 3 or 4 things. I worked. One of my first jobs was working in a Christian bookstore. I actually worked in a couple of Christian bookstores between the end of high school and college. And I think I had forgotten about those charts until really recently, and I heard someone else bring that concept. And I don't know if they still have that kind of thing. I guess the bench is a little deeper now.
Probably do. I think that maybe the line has blurred a little bit between Christian bands and bands who have Christians in them, which I think is probably a positive change.
Yeah. I mean, I have not kept up as well with full-on contemporary Christian, you know, any of those labeled out of Nashville or anything
I don't either. I don't even know who those people are anymore.
College, I'll sometimes see like signs up or hear on the radio like an advertisement about this. You know, Christian Fest 2012 that's going to be around here somewhere, and I don't know any of the people are talking about. And some of it might be, I mean, I plead ignorance with that, and some of it might have gotten more in depth and be better now than it was before. I've just found enough other things that.
That's kind of how I feel about it.
And so I still listen. I'm still really deeply impacted by people that kind of straddle both of those worlds. Maybe not Bazan so much anymore, because he probably wouldn't say that he straddles those anymore. But Derek Webb still, and Jars of Clay, and you know, some of those types of folks that I grew up listening to, and then seemed to evolve beyond that movement, and even have like, you know, tussles with Christian radio in the industry and stuff. I still listen to a lot of that kind of thing, and then. There's just so much great music in Austin, or all of my friends are making such great music. You know,
that's a great thing about being in Austin.
And even people in Mosaic, and our own music, the music that's being written here for our community or by our community that we use in liturgy. I gravitate towards a lot more of that kind of thing. You know?
Well, you can probably tell that we went on way longer past this point, but I decided to cut it short because it was getting long, and also Sam was begging me to edit out some stuff, but the silliness really ensued at this point. You can also probably tell that the audio was a little off, and I apologize for that. We kind of had a snafu, and we were recording the entire time through the microphone in my laptop, which, as you can imagine, was not the best. And so we're sitting there at microphones that weren't even picking us up. I didn't know that till later, of course. And so I apologize for the bad quality, but I thought it was worth getting it out there for you because Sam has great things to say. Check out mosaicAustin.org, and I'll put that in the show notes, as well as the podcast. We can go and listen to Sam's sermons and things from Mosaic. All right. Thanks once again for listening. As always, I'm so privileged to have you here. And you can find me at ShaneBlackshear.com or SeminaryDropout.com, same place. Facebook.com/ShaneBlackshear123 because Shane Blackshear 122 was taken. And also, of course, at Twitter, Twitter.com/BeardOnABike. All right. See you guys next time. Bye.